Welcome back to Smart Health Talk with your host, Elaine McFadden.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Elaine McFadden, a registered dietitian with a master's in public health, and we are here talking about subjects that impact just that. Maybe we don't think about it as much. We just go shop, go to the restaurant, buy food. We're not really thinking about everything that's in that food that we can't see, but it's there. And we have, it's not just there, but it's in our environment. And there are people out there that work for the government that work for what they call the vector department. And that's related to vectors such as, insects, mosquitoes, that kind of a thing. And these people have incredible power. They have incredible power that they use a wide range of different poisons, herbicides, pesticides, things that can actually kill people in the right situations, cause you to be very sick, which we just heard of. One man that accidentally got it on his skin has never not been well since. We have someone from a vector department, from San Joaquin Vector Department here in Central California, and she worked for them for 5 years. And through that experience was exposed herself. Many of us are being exposed to pesticides. We don't even know it. We have symptoms. We don't recognize them as a pesticide exposure. She's had to go through all kinds of health battles as a result of her job as these exposures. And she became a whistleblower because the whole job situation was crazy. But the bottom line is this vector department is given millions and millions of dollars to spray these pesticides. How these are used, where they're applied on private property, around our homes, private property without people's knowledge, around our home without knowledge or permission, on and on and on. There are places that pesticides are being used that we cannot even conceive. And Tiffany Anderson, who is a whistleblower that went through this whole experience and is helping to educate us, because we need to know what this department is doing. We need to know what they're spending our millions of taxpayer dollars on, because it is directly affecting our health. Some of these pesticides can literally drift 1,000 miles. And so if something is being sprayed, like in our next door, don't think it's not affecting you. It is affecting you. And we need to understand better of what the vector department is doing, because as citizens, we need to decide, is this what they should be doing? Do we consider this a service to us, or are they doing things in a way that we don't care about? And so I want to introduce Tiffany Anderson, and we're going to get into some more information about what exactly is going on in this in our different vector departments, because we have them all across the country representing our entire geographical area. So, Tiffany, are you there?
Elaine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
so
we're doing good.
I need to eat some crow before we begin any conversations regarding vector. And I was going, if you remember correctly, I was going to meet with my son right after we were going to go on a date to a concert.
And this is from last week's show, everyone that is tuning in.
Yes. So last week I said I was going to see the black crows. And as I was telling my son this, he goes, "I bet you said that on the radio, didn't you, Mom?" And I went to go see Counting Crows. So now I'm eating crow, and then
you're eating crow because it wasn't the black crows.
It wasn't the black crows. How embarrassing! But then it gets a little more than that. And you said that you're getting the honest truth, and sometimes I'm human, and the time period that we're talking about is kind of there's been a big time span from 2004 when I began my employment until 2012 at the end of my employment. So I was actually employed there for 6 years.
Oh,
6
6 years.
No, that's not 6. 2004 to 2012 is
8.
8. Thank you. So I was employed there 8 years. I was removed 3 years out of the 8 for 3 knee surgeries. So So I said I was exposed to formaldehyde for 11 years, and that was not the case. They sprayed formaldehyde for 9 years. That was that. And so I just
And
to
that
put
was,
that one.
and this was what we talked about, everyone, on a previous show, that at the San Joaquin Vector Department, this fish that they were maintaining were having excessive amounts of lice, formaldehyde, which is a very extremely dangerous toxin, was being used unbeknownst to employees, who then had health issues related to the use of that formaldehyde
Exactly.
by the supervisors to cover up the problems that they were having there. Now, I wanted to ask you, now, this was uncovered by the DA's office, this whole conspiracy to cover up using the
Correct.
formaldehyde, that was exposed. What
Yes.
happened in that case?
What happened? I filed a complaint with the civil grand jury for the. I kind of wanted to get into the West Nile thing pretty deep, and that's why I filed the grand jury complaint. But I had filed the grand jury complaint, which initiated an investigation. I was contacted by two grand jury members, the foreman and another lady. I will not use their names at this time, but all the documents are on my blog. So if you wanted their names, you could get them. But just to keep their privacy intact and stuff. Um, so they interviewed me, and then it was at the end of a grand jury fiscal year. A grand jury begins in July and they end in June the following year. And so I was interviewed right before they were getting ready to end. So then I was interviewed again by the next grand jury investigator pick pool. So a few months later, by the same lady who had interviewed me with the previous foreman and a new person. They actually had released. This one woman had told me that she tried to write exactly what I had said to her down on documentation and submit that as the findings of the grand jury. But there was one, the new foreman that was put in place, he would not allow it to happen. He had connections to my manager. And interesting, I'm kind of going off topic, and I promise I'll go back to the formalin. But when the grand jury was getting ready to release their findings, even though they were so light-handed and did not report what the real things that had to be uncovered, my manager, the day that the grand jury released their findings, had a heart attack due to the stress, which I found kind of interesting. It doesn't make me happy or anything like that, but he had allowed one of my coworkers to be given a heart attack. And so I just thought it was very ironic.
Well, and why are they
This,
so stressed out, Tiffany? Because
well,
maybe they
one,
have something to hide, right?
exactly. The manager, the one who had the heart attack, I think I asked you to look up the Mosquito Research Foundation. And a Mosquito Research Foundation is a new way to funnel money into it's where the managers and um, pesticide representatives who have retired, they go to funnel more money. Since they're retired, they can't take any more from the county because they're no longer there. So now they just have this new Mosquito Research Foundation that does the same thing that mosquito abatement does, except every district now donates money to them. And ironically, this foundation was started the same year that the grand jury came out with their findings. My salary had been taken away from me, which was $40,000 a year. And the first year that our district donated money to this foundation, they donated my salary, my annual wages to this foundation, which does nothing. And the manager sits he was sitting as the board the purse strings, the
And
person who
so
does.
they have the power to take taxpayer dollars that are allocated to their department
And
and
donate them wherever they want.
donate it. I That's very surprising to me that a government
This
agency can take taxpayer money and do that with it.
this agency has no oversight. The only oversight they have is the Mosquito Board of Trustees, Our mosquito board of trustees have been assigned by our San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors. And I'll just let you know, about 2 weeks ago, when we were done wrapping up the sixth episode, I sent every single board of supervisors in San Joaquin County a copy of this radio interview, all of them actually, and asked them to reinvestigate our county, our San Joaquin County Mosquito and Vector Control District, because
Right
of
on,
the
Tiffany. Yeah, that's what I've been thinking the whole time. I was wondering. That's why I was asking if this stuff was like still going on.
it
But
is.
well,
It
and
is.
so
You know that,
who will
yeah.
come and investigate them? Who will be the department responsible?
You know, I don't know who will come investigate them. If whoever is guilty, you know, obviously, and anyone who's benefiting from this and doesn't have a conscience is not going, you know, they're not doing what they're supposed to. They haven't been for a very long
So
time.
does
Just
anyone
like,
ever audit the department and how they're spending and receiving money?
we do have CalTax. I have been in contact with a few agencies. In fact, I just how I met you was by reaching out and sharing my story. I had somebody from the because they're committing payroll fraud as well. I think you and I got into that before, but not on the radio. Um, I don't know if you want me to finish answering the question about the formaldehyde and all that, but they're committing payroll fraud, and they have been since 2004 with my payroll.
Well, I would like to know what you were going to say about the mosquitoes too. And
So what happened with when I filed the grand jury complaint? They started to interview other employees, and there was a senior. He was an assistant supervisor. He was the one who had been assaulted by the supervisor who had the heart, and so had the heart attack. So when they interviewed him, he had all kinds of documentation of the formaldehyde spraying and treatments, and he actually probably knows more, Elaine, than you and I know. It never came out in the grand jury findings because, like I mentioned last week, the investigator who was doing the investigation for the criminal charges, he died. I mean, he died within a month after he interviewed me, and the district attorney who took over the investigation refused to talk to me. I asked. One day I was contacted by the grand jury. They had the grand jury foreman. Her name was Carla. She called me in and she asked me to stop corresponding with the grand jury. And Scott Fickner was sitting in the room with her. He was sitting at the grand jury table. Her and I were sitting in the grand jury entrance. And so he could hear us. His back was to me. And she was very kind to me. And she was very sweet. She was asking me about my mother, who was terminal. She was asking me about my grandmother, who was sick. They lived in the same, they lived right by each other. And she had seen an ambulance come to my mom and grandma's house. So she was asking me about those things. And then basically she told me the grand jury would be releasing some findings soon, and, to please not contact them anymore. And on that same day was the day that I went to pick up all the medical records that I was wanting to give to the DA investigator who had asked for them. And so because he wasn't there, and he was in the hospital, he was terminal and he was dying, I asked if I could speak to Scott, who would be his boss, would oversee him. And Scott's back was to me, and he just shook his head and he said no. And I wasn't allowed to say another word to the district attorney, to the grand jury. It was over. So I was told maybe 4 weeks before that was the first time I was ever told I had been illegally exposed to formaldehyde in a formalin sense. So when people hear formaldehyde, they for our body actually produces formaldehyde, and formaldehyde is put in many things and it's used in many fashions, but in the form that it was mixed in is what made it a gas and is what made it toxic.
And we also make a oxidase that neutralizes formaldehyde at the same time.
Okay.
So in our cell, and that is the difference from GMOs, a GMO product, a crop, and a regular one is the GMO seed actually creates more formaldehyde, and that balance isn't kept. So that you end up having a product that has more formaldehyde in it than that it wasn't neutralized. So
Okay.
anyway, you
But there,
mentioned
so,
that.
so there can be antagonists and there can be synergists. When you're using a chemical, you can have a chemical that a synergist would be something that would help enhance the killing or the mechanisms of the chemical, or you can have an antagonist, which means that it can repel the chemical, it can throw it off and make it more toxic or more harmful. And when they were using the formaldehyde, the conditions that they were using it, the formalin, and the conditions that they were using it, it was all going against the what the label, the MSDS label, was recommending, which means that it was becoming an antagonist. They were using it in the worst conditions, using it in the worst ways. And what we were told, what was written in the grand jury report, was that they sprayed it and it evaporated. Well, if you just spray something to evaporate it, then why are you spraying it? If it doesn't have any method or purpose, then why are you going to great lengths, for one, to illegally use it, and two, why are you lying about it?
Yes, and they
So
were illegally and they're spraying on people's property without
not
them
the
knowing.
formaldehyde.
And
They
so,
were
oh, not the formaldehyde. But what I
not the
wanted to ask
formaldehyde.
you is, like you just said, like there are certain chemicals that are antagonists in that. So are you guys were they actually mixing up? Like, would you mix up like a special formula using a couple of different kinds of
Can
pesticides
you
or
see
these
my face? Can you
antagonists?
see my face?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can. Okay. I'm trying not to laugh because okay, when my first year working for Vector, I was assigned the slipper zone, the easy zone. It was walnut holers, which were really easy to handle. They were roadsides. The zone I was given was created so that I would be like an extra hand in town for the assistant supervisor that I had. So I handled very few chemicals my first year. My second year, I was put out into the islands, which would be west of, at first I was east in Linden, then I was west out on the islands. And on the islands, I would drive about 100 miles a day. There were hardly few sources that I would treat at all. Mostly everything I would do would be, I would measure crops, I would measure duck flooding, I would report back to the manager, and then they would fly it. But there were other areas, such
So
as the
they would
Escalon.
aerial spray that area.
Correct, because it was so large. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of acres, thousands of acres on the islands, and so you can't
This
hand
has
treat
been
that.
blowing my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about this after you told us this, that these islands are pretty much a mosquito epidemic ready to happen all the time.
Well, okay. So the islands are kind of funny. I mean, I know we want the bird migration. So a lot of these. I really wanted to finish your question,
Yeah,
and we're
go ahead
actually.
and finish.
Um, well, okay, so I had the islands, and so basically I didn't have to handle chemicals very much. A lot of times that zone two was created, so because there was just a lot of, they'd fly it a lot. Then I again would be pulled out of my zone and put into my assistant supervisor zone, and I would have to treat his area. So again, I was very limited in my knowledge, very limited. Well, not in my knowledge, because I learned walnut hullers, I learned duck clubs, and then I knew the towns and the cities pretty well, of Stockton and the surrounding areas. But there were these zones where there were dairies, the dairy farms, and they breed mosquitoes like crazy. So those guys would mix up a concoction, like a recipe. And of course, they wouldn't teach me. When I was moved out to Escalon, nobody was allowed to talk to me. I was moved from the islands out into Escalon as a punishment for filing a sexual harassment complaint against a couple.
So they were. We only have like three or 4 minutes left. So they were mixing up. You said they had a special recipe. They had like their own recipes of pesticide.
They would
mixtures.
take adulticides. They would mix with larvicides. They would put oil. Yes, they would do things that weren't calibrated or were not appropriate. That they would have gotten in trouble if the ag department pulled them over. And so they wouldn't tell me.
Wow, that's really interesting.
They wouldn't tell me because I had filed a sexual harassment complaint. So when I filed my sexual harassment complaint, I started getting harassed pretty bad, and they would yell at me. They'd scream at me the acronyms for the agency I used, which was IRMA. They'd yell at me and call me Irma and bang stuff at me, put a snake on my truck.
Do you feel that the part of the intimidation that you went through in your job, Tiffany, was the intimidation meant that you would be less likely to go out and tell things about what was really going on there? No, they wanted me to quit.
What they wanted me to do was they wanted me to quit.
Okay, yeah.
Period.
They want you to just go away, and then the problem goes away.
Right, because I was the problem.
Okay, well we have a couple of minutes. We have a couple of minutes left. Is there there anything else that you wanted to share before we run out of time?
No, I really kind of want to why I don't believe we have West Nile, but that's just going to have to be for another time. I just, what I really kind of wanted to share was just the chemicals that we used. Okay, we used the adulticide, and that is a nerve toxin. It attacks your central nervous system. So like part of my exposures were where my central nervous system was just shot, and so. I wanted to start getting into the different chemicals that we used and kind of teach you what they were.
Well, that would be a good place. Why don't we plan to start there next week? We'll plan on getting into these chemicals that are being used, and we have to really weigh the benefits against the cost, not just for the actual pesticide, but to the environmental exposure and our exposure and long-term implications of these chemicals. And thank you so much, Tiffany, for all of your information. Every single week I learn something new, and the whole cemetery thing, I haven't stopped thinking about that either. And if you missed that, you're going to have to watch last week's show, everybody, but it will blow your mind. I'm just thinking of all the cemeteries across the whole country. It's just like, I'm just thinking legislation needs to be passed. We need to get rid of these. You know
what? We have Lodi in Stockton, and the Lodi Cemetery does not. They dump their flowers out. So San Joaquin County could make the Stockton Cemetery not, and so half of the cemeteries in our county do, and half don't.
Was that like one FTE? Just that the cemetery job, the cemetery responsibility, a full-time equivalent, like a job, one person's job.
No, it would take a whole crew. There'd be sometimes we'd work overtime Saturdays and Sundays, and everybody, all 19 staff
for something that could be completely avoided, and we could use that money for prevention instead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. You getting that? Okay. Mismanagement. That's where I was.
Yeah, and this is important, and this I think is an important discussion because we have this problem in many government departments.
Areas. Yes.
Yeah, yes, and you're bringing it to light, Tiffany. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be interesting. And I don't know if you heard, Carrie, that they're moving forward with the Roundup cancer.
I'm going to have to go back and listen to that. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. Okay, thanks again. Bye.
Bye.